Hi, everybody. So we are going to read through the overture of the Crucible today, and then answer a couple of questions, do some analysis, all that good stuff. So when you think of an overture, usually you would think about like an overture in an orchestra or like musical performance like that, which is the very beginning of the performance. And this is kind of the same thing. So this is the very beginning of the Crucible, but it's more of an introduction. So it's giving us some background information so this is written by Arthur Miller in his voice, and he's giving information into what the Puritans were thinking at the time and what he was thinking at the time when he was writing the play and characters and all of that stuff. So this is kind of some necessary background information that we need. I don't love all of it. And remember, this was based in the 1600s, so they're pretty problematic, as were the Puritans in general back then, right? So there are some questions on here, so as we read, you're just going to highlight or change the color of whatever answer you want. Just select it, click highlight or the color, or you can do it up here. And then there's some analysis questions to answer at the end. If you want to zoom in, because it does start off pretty small, all you do is press this plus button on the bottom right hand corner. And if you want to follow along with me while I read it, keep listening, and if you are just here for the instructions, go ahead and read it on your own and answer the questions. All right. A note on the historical accuracy of this play. This play is not history in the sense in which the word is used by the academic historian. Dramatic purposes have sometimes required many characters to be fused into one. The number of girls involved in the crying out has been reduced. Abigail's age has been raised. While there were several judges of almost equal authority, I have symbolized them all in Hawthorne and Danforth, which are the characters that we'll get to know eventually. However, I believe that the reader will discover here that the essential nature of the strangest and most awful chapters in human history. The fate of each character is exactly that of his historical model, and there is no one in the drama who did not play a similar, and in some cases exactly the same, role in history. As for the characters of the persons, little is known about most of them excepting what may be surmised from a few letters, the trial records, certain broadsides written at the time, and references to their conduct in sources of varying reliability. They may therefore be taken as creations of my own, drawn to the best of my ability in the conformity with their known behavior, except as indicated in the commentary I have written for this text. Act 1, an overture. A small excuse me. A small upper bedroom in this home of Reverend Samuel Parris, Salem, Massachusetts, in the spring of 1692. There is a narrow window at the left. Through its leaded panes the morning sunlight streams. A candle still burns near the bed, which is at the right. A chest, a chair, and a small table are the other furnishings. At the back, a door opened by the landing of the stairway to the ground floor. The room gives What? The room, I'm guessing that's supposed to be off. The room gives off an air of clean spareness. The roof rafters are exposed and the wood colors are raw and unmellowed. If you hear noises, by the way, my dog is chewing a bone, so don't be bothered. As the curtain rises, Reverend Parris is discovered kneeling beside the bed, evidently in prayer. His daughter Betty Parris, aged 10, is lying on the bed, inert. Okay. So the paragraphs are just numbered for your convenience. At the time of these events, Parris was in his middle 40s. In history, he cut a villainous path, and there is very little good to be said for him. He believed he was being persecuted wherever he went, despite his best efforts to win people and God to his side. In meeting, he felt insulted if someone rose to shut the door without first asking his permission. He was a widower with no interest in children or talent with them. He regarded them as young adults, and until this strange crisis, like the rest of Salem, never conceived that the children were anything but thankful for being permitted to walk straight, eyes slightly lowered, arms at the sides, and mouths shut until bidden to speak. His house stood in the town, but today would hardly call it a village. The meeting house was nearby, and from this point outward, toward the bay or inland, there were few small-windowed, dark houses snuggling against the raw Massachusetts winter. Salem had been established hardly Actually, I'm going to finish this in a second, but this is our first multiple choice. So, according to the description, Reverend Paris is all of the following except controlling, religious, paranoid, or social. So, that's from this paragraph right here. Put the correct answer either in a different color or highlighted, whichever is easier for you. Okay. So, Salem had been established hardly. Come on, man. Hardly what? 40 years before. To the European world, the whole province was a barbaric frontier inhabited by a sect of fanatics who, nevertheless, were shipping out products of slowly increasing quantity and value. No one can really know what their lives were like. They had no novelists and would not have permitted anyone to read a novel if one were handy. Their creed forbade anything resembling a theater or vain enjoyment. They did not celebrate Christmas, and a holiday from work meant only that they must concentrate even more upon prayer. Which is not to say that nothing broke into the strict and somber way of life. When a new farmhouse was built, friends assembled to raise the roof, and there would be special foods cooked and probably some potent cider passed around. There was a good supply of ne'er-do-wells in Salem, who dallied at the shovel-board and Bridget Bishop's tavern. Probably more than the creed, hard work kept the morals of the place from spoiling, for the people were forced to fight the land like heroes for every grain of corn, and no man had ever very much time for fooling around. That there were some jokers, however, is indicated by the practice of appointing a two-man patrol whose duty was to walk forth in the times of God's worship, to take notice of such as either lie about the meeting house without attending the word in any ordinances, or that lie at home or in the fields without giving good account thereof, and to take the names of such persons, and to present them to the magistrates, whereby they may be accordingly proceeded against. This predilection, which means preference or special liking for something, so people liking for minding other people's business, so basically people like to gossip, was time honored among the people of Salem, and it undoubtedly created many of the suspicions which were to feed the coming of madness. It was also, in my opinion, one of the things that a John Proctor would rebel against, for the time of the armed camp had almost passed, and since the country was reasonably, although not wholly safe, the old disciplines were beginning to rankle. But as in all such matters, the issue was not clear. Cut for danger was still a possibility, and in unity still lay the best promise of safety. The edge of the wilderness was close by. The American continent stretched endlessly west, and it was full of mystery for them. It stood, dark and threatening, over their shoulders night and day, for out of it Indian tribes marauded from time to time, and Reverend Paris had parishioners who had lost relatives to these heathens. The I have such a hard time saying this word, parochial snobbery. So parochial means having a limited or narrow outlook or scope, so basically being super close-minded. Snobbery of these people was partly responsible for their failure to convert the Indians. So they were trying to get the Native Americans who were around them, because they basically had just, the white people have moved to America from England, and they're like, you need to be part of our religion. And then the natives are like, no thanks, right? So they were upset about that. Probably they also preferred to take land from heathens rather than from fellow Christians. At any rate, very few Indians were converted, and the Salem folk believed that the virgin forest was the devil's last preserve, his home base, and the citadel of his final stand. To the best of their knowledge, the American forest was the last place on earth that was not paying homage to God. For these reasons, among others, they carried about an air of innate resistance, even of persecution. Their fathers had, of course, been persecuted in England, so now they in their church found it necessary to deny any other sect its freedom, lest their new Jerusalem be defiled and corrupted by wrong ways and deceitful ideas. So number 2. All of the following are reasons why the Puritans persecuted the Native Americans except, and then choose, these questions use Indians because that's how natives were labeled back then. Okay. Next. I don't know why it keeps doing that. Number 3. There we go. They believed, in short, that they held their steady hands the candle that would light the world. We have inherited this belief, and it had helped and hurt us. It helped them with the discipline it gave them. They were a dedicated folk, by and large, and they had to survive the life they had chosen or to be born into this country. The proof of their beliefs' value to them may be taken from the opposite character of the first Jamestown settlement, farther south in Virginia. The Englishmen who landed there were motivated mainly by a hunt for profit. They had thought to pick up a wealth of the new country and then return rich to England. They were a band of individualists and as much more an integrating group that the Massachusetts men. But Virginia destroyed them. Massachusetts tried to kill off the Puritans, but they combined. They set up a communal society which, in the beginning, was little more than an armed camp with an autocratic and very devoted leadership. It was, however, an autocracy by consent, for they were united from top to bottom by a commonly held ideology whose perpetuation was the reason and justification for all their sufferings. So their self-denial, their purposefulness, their suspicion of all vain pursuits, their hard-handed justice, were altogether perfect instruments for their conquest to space so antagonistic to man. So, right here, what is the primary purpose of paragraph 10? So choose what you think. That's the one we just read, number 10. But the people of Salem in 1692 were not quite the dedicated folk that arrive on the Mayflower. A vast differentiation had taken place, and in their own time a revolution had unseated the royal government and substituted a junta, which at this moment in power. So that means a group of people who join in ruling a government after a revolution. The times to their eyes must have been out of joint, and to the common folk must have seemed as insoluble and complicated as do ours today. It is not hard to see how easily many could have been led to that time of confusion had been brought up upon them by the deep and darkling forces. No hint of such speculation appears on the court record, but social disorder in any age breeds such as mystical suspicions, and when, as in Salem, wonders are brought forth from below the social surface, it is much to expect people to hold back very long from lying on the victims with all that force of their frustrations. The Salem tragedy, which is about to begin in these pages, developed from a paradox. So, paradox down here, we've talked about this a little bit with literary terms, but it means something such as a situation that is made up of two opposite things that seems impossible but is actually true or possible. Okay? So it is a paradox in whose grip we still live, and there is no prospect yet that we will discover its resolution. Simply it was this. For good purposes, even high purposes, the people of Salem developed a theocracy, which is a government ruled by the people of the church. It combined state and religious power, whose function was to keep the community together and to prevent any kind of disunity that might open it to destruction by material or ideological enemies. Okay, so I'm going to pause there for a second. Right here, what is the primary purpose of paragraph 11? So make sure to answer that one as well. It was forced to a necessary purpose and accomplished that maybe. Not why it's being annoying. And accomplish that purpose. But all organization is and must be grounded on the idea of exclusion and prohibition, just as two objects cannot occupy the same space. Evidently, the time came in New England when the repressions of order were heavier than seemed warranted by the dangers against which the order was organized. The witch hunt was a perverse manifestation of this panic which set in among all the classes when the balance began to turn toward the greater individual freedom, right? It turned into hysteria. When one rises above the individual villainy displayed, one can only pity them all, just as we shall be pitied some day. It is impossible for man to organize his social life without repressions, and the balance has yet to be struck between order and freedom. The witch hunt was not, however, a mere repression. It was also, and as importantly, a long overdue opportunity for everyone so inclined to express publicly his guilt and sins, under the cover of accusations against the victims. It suddenly became possible, and patriotic and holy, for a man to say that Martha Corey had come into his bedroom at night, and that, while his wife was sleeping at his side, Martha laid herself down on his chest and nearly suffocated him. Of course it was her spirit only, but his satisfaction at confessing himself was no lighter than it had been if it had been Martha herself. One could not ordinarily speak such things in public. Long-held hatreds of neighbors could now be openly expressed and vengeance taken, despite the Bible's charitable injunctions. Landlust, which had been expressed before by constant bickering over the boundaries and deeds, could now be elevated to the arena of morality. One could cry witch against one's neighbor and feel perfectly justified in the bargain. Old scores could be settled on a plain heavenly combat between Lucifer and the Lord. Suspicions and envy as miserable toward the happy could and did burst out in the general revenge. So basically people were just like, hey, I don't like my neighbor, they're a witch. And then they would get hanged or something. Right? And then this last multiple choice up here. According to Miller, the witch hunts were all of the following except. Okay? And then lastly, you have analysis. So what is the purpose of this section? Clearly explain in detail the paradox of the Salem witch trials. So how are there two opposite things going on? And Miller insists that this paradox is one in whose grip we still live, and states that there is no prospect yet that we will discover its resolution. What do you think he means by this? Explain, okay? There's no right or wrong answer as long as you explain your reasoning on this last one, okay? Please let me know if you have any questions, and we will start reading the Crucible, the actual dialogue of the play tomorrow.